Wow, Joy and Arta, thank you so much. Arta, I'm going to start with you. From your position of privilege and deeper knowledge now, how are you working to educate your children to create a different world?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because ultimately, they're the ones that are gonna be inheriting the mess that we've made. So I think one is by educating them. So educating them in ways that they're not educated in school, and also taking that education to their schools. So, for example, my daughter did a book club on Stamped. So there's a version of Stamped by Ibrahim X. Kendi that is for children. I think it's called Stamped from the Beginning, maybe, or maybe it's the opposite way around. But there's a version that's actually for youth. And so they did that for their book club, took it into her school, and making sure that they have that education that I didn't get. So I think that's the first level of it, right? The second level is talking about what's going on and exposing them to it. So despite COVID, we went to some of the Black Lives Matter rallies here in Sacramento, and in some ways you put yourself at risk by doing that, particularly back at that period of time, because there were large groups of people. But I felt that was more important, right? That was more important than my safety or their safety, was to make sure that they are there and they understand what's happening, and also that they see the truth, right? Because when I was there, it was literally 50,000 people, unified, peaceful, and there for racial justice. And then that night, what they showed on news was the 200 people who stayed behind and looted, right? So it was important for me that they understand that what they see on TV, and I showed them on TV, I said, is that what was happening when you were there? But this is the people who weren't there. This is what they think the movement is about, because they're not there and they're just believing what the media has told them, right? So I think, and then the third, and I think really the most critical thing, is to put them in situations that are outside of our bubble, right? So to make sure that we are in communities that we otherwise wouldn't be in unless we are actually making a conscious effort to do that. And some people might say, well, it's disingenuous to try to make friends with people based on it. That's not what I'm talking about. If you are exposing yourself to different kinds of people, if you're exposing yourself to different communities, then you will naturally form friendships, right? The idea that you're not going to form friends with someone who is in a different place in life or different skin color than you is really based on ignorance, right? So it's not that you are artificially seeking out a friendship. It's just that if I'm interacting with more Black people, I'm going to have more Black friends as a result of that, because there's going to be, just like with anyone else, there's going to be a group of people amongst them who I automatically just naturally connect with. I have that chemistry with, or, I share a love of gumbo with, like with Dr. Joy. So it's, there's those connections are going to be made. So I think that's also important, is making sure that they're outside of their bubble. And I think the biggest mistake we make in the United States is that we are worried about keeping our kids safe, but that is what's making them unsafe.
Thank you.
So the next question we'll ask is also directed towards Dr. Arta. It says, as you do your research, have you found that America is not the only country involved? Did you find information that all the European countries have made their wealth on the backs of Africa and Americans?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that, as I mentioned in the chat there, I tried to respond to that one in the chat. It is a global issue, right? So really all of our issue with racism stems out of colonialism, right? So slavery stems out of colonialism, and all of this stems out of this doctrine of discovery. So Native people, people of color, indigenous people throughout the world have been disenfranchised. It's a global issue. And this has also created a global culture of anti-Blackness, right? So when I look at Iranian culture, right, Iran wasn't quote unquote colonized, but it was colonized, right? It was colonized by Great Britain, even though not officially. The wealthy and the powerful people were the white British, right? And that also, and also, Iran participated in the Middle East slave trade, which we don't talk a lot about, right? But so you have, again, this hierarchy that was created where white was seen as powerful, and the black people that were brought in forcefully from Africa were the slaves. And so it creates this colorism even within Persian culture, where white is seen as beautiful, white is seen as intelligent, white is seen as better, right? And black is seen as inferior. But this has happened throughout the globe. And so when we look at European wealth, there's this myth of, oh, well, it's due to the ingenuity, right? And there's no question that great inventions and these things have been done. But what allows people to be in that situation where they can start thinking about these things? It's the wealth that was provided that they stole, both in terms of manpower as well as in terms of natural resources from Africa and from the rest of the world. There's no two ways about that. They didn't go to these countries to just for vacation, right? They went there to take things. It's as simple as that. That's why they went there, was to take things. And they did take things. They took manpower, they took natural resources. And so now we look at Africa and we say, well, why is Africa struggling so much? Well, during the period of time when manpower was so important, we took millions and millions of people in the global slave trade to the Americas and to the Middle East and even to Europe from that country. And we took their natural resources. So is there any question why it wouldn't be lagging behind? Have we ever done anything to try to remedy that? It's like you break someone's leg and you say, well, why are you limping? It just doesn't make it doesn't, I think once you know the history of what's happened and it's a different history than what we're taught, then it all makes complete sense. It's very kind of, I think, very clear in front of you. And it's hard then to really counteract the truth, even though people still try.
Thank you, Arta. Joy, we have a question. What can you share about what the individual and collective healing process looks like in terms of its healing stages, of overcoming toxic inherited thought patterns with the associated psychological trauma?
Well, that's a big bite.
I know, sorry.
I'm engaged in most of my work right now, and it's really focused largely on young people, though just in terms of my career, I work with anybody that has a pulse that you put in front of me. I'll work with you. And part of it is exactly what is obvious. You can't fix what you don't know. So first it is to know, and this is a spiritual principle in the Baha'i faith. First it is to know and then to do. And my sense is when people know better, they can do better.
Yeah.
The other part is how and what you are presenting in terms of understanding the nature of the injury. And that requires truth. And from a Baha'i vantage point, one of the most important principles, as a matter of fact, the most important virtue is truthfulness, because we're told, and in our writings, it says that truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtue. So in other words, without truthfulness, you can't be well, period. And so we have to, again, unlock and be willing to accept and embrace the truth. So that's one of the things I help people understand the nature of the injury. For example, people ask me all the time, I have 3 evidence-based models. And anybody that's working out there in the field knows how important that is, which basically means, right, you have to count and measure it, especially in European culture. I can say, well, they'll say, well, Joy, there's going to be, based on all our calculations and what we've measured, a 40% chance of rain. But it's raining. Okay. And so my sense is sometimes you just need to, look outside, because that means there's a 100% chance it's raining. And so there's this idea of having to measure everything. And so what people will say to me, again, because we need to detach ourselves from any feeling. Remember, we want to be induced to feel anything. We want to become cerebral. And they'll say, Dr. Joy, can we have your model? No, you can't. My answer to that is no. I teach a 10-week graduate level course throughout the year. We're in the middle of one right now. And you don't get my model till it's a 10-week course. You don't get it till around 8, 9 week. Because I need you to understand so that you could at least, beyond anything else, do no harm. But people think it's a bullet point. Let me cross the T's and dot the I's. This is heart work.
Right.
My work is heart work. So the answer is you are the answer. Do your work so you can help others and maybe not harm anybody. At the very least, not harm anybody. So I think the way we do that and the way we explain that, the way we understand it, let me give you an example of it. This is something so that people understand how things get transmitted generationally, right? I'm going to give you something innocuous. When I was a little girl, I remember looking up at my grandmother's hand. That's how small I was. She was holding my hand and I'm looking up at it. So I was little, toddler, some age, little. And I remember when my grandmother would be speaking, and when grandmother got upset, you always knew she got upset because one, she would pat her foot on the floor. She would pat her foot. And the other thing she would do is grab the edge. This is my little jacket. She would grab the edge of her apron. And she'd be holding on to that apron and she wouldn't even know she's doing this. But I knew as a little girl, when I saw that hand, something was wrong. Then I found out a little later, as I got older, my mother did it. My mother holds the end of her, blouse, jacket, skirt, she would be holding whenever she was upset. Then I found out my mother's sister did it, my aunt. And I was like, and then it's the most amazing thing in the world. I will be speaking. People know me. Faith knows this about me, right? I have a little coat with a jacket with a little pocket in it. My coat has a pocket. And at the end of a talk, I would open my hand and find a little piece of tissue. And I wouldn't remember how I got there. And I didn't know it was there. Stay with me. I had no idea. So, of course, I'm a researcher. I'm a social scientist. So I'm looking at me now. I'm doing a deep dive on joy. What's going on that you're holding a piece of tissue? So then I started going about trying to figure out, and I looked in almost every pocket and I had that balled up piece of tissue. Years later, I have a conversation with my sister. She goes, "You do that too?" And I said, "You do it?" She went, look in every pocket, that little piece of tissue. Now we're not holding on to the side. You see, we're not doing that. Transmitted. Then I found out my daughter did it. Now I'm feeling some kind of way. Right now, I'm really feeling some kind of way. Now, let's be clear. This is innocuous. Whether I hold a piece of tissue or not in my hand is not going to hurt me. It's not going to produce some deep psychological wound. But I want to share with you just how things get transmitted. Now, my granddaughter doesn't do it. We became very consciously aware of what we were doing. And probably, I'm not even certain how, but she never saw it. I don't know why it didn't get transmitted to my granddaughter, but we stopped it. We halted the little tissue in the hand or the hole in the side of the thing. But what if it's not that? What if it's, gosh, she sure is pretty, even though she's dark. What if it's that?
Right.
What if it's, you see what I'm saying? So these are things. So first it is to know, then it is to do. And then we start unraveling it, but we have to do the deep dive. We have to speak the truth to ourselves and to others. And we then have to model it. That's the answer.
We each have to be committed to our own healing work. Yeah.
Heart work.
Yeah, heart work.
Heart work.
Thank you, Dr. Joy. There was a question that was coming that was, very similar to that, which was leaning into, how can just common everyday work and people be a part of this change? And I think you leaned into that by saying we all have to do our individual hard work and step into a space of love, which I love. I want to ask a question, right? Based off hearing you guys' conversation, Dr. Arta, you spoke very intently about understanding how Black folks in America have pulled themselves up by the bootstrap, but there has been a repetitive warfare, right? You talked about you used Tulsa. And what I do know, right? I'm going to take this, I'm going to connect it, but this is a question for both of y'all. In the third verse of my song 10, it says, we're doing our own thing, plotting our own schemes, celebrating the 10, the consciousness that it brings. 10 times 10, 100 years from when we elevated the scene, that's 1919. Presenting this idea of 10 times 10, that's 100 years, that's consciousness on top of consciousness. We're looking at a period in history in 1919, 1920, 1921 that is on the backside of a pandemic called the Spanish flu. Is an opportunity for Black folks to rise, depend on each other, and elevate economically. But then we see white America coming in to sabotage and destroy, burn, murder, pillage, rip land from African Americans. We then move forward to Dr. Joy discussing this idea that there's this teacher who is standing in front of Black children, not giving the opportunity for the Black children to win. And Dr. Joy says, at this point in history, I can't be concerned with you getting right. I need to be concerned with you not being in front of these kids at all, and we putting people in place who know how to speak to them. In 2021, I would even say post, right? Moving towards the end of a pandemic and not only not wanting things to go back to normal, but I would say not wanting things to repeat in history. Where do we move as brothers and sisters? How do we create a connection where Black folks can once again start to continue to pull themselves up by the bootstrap? What is the role that both play in that aspect so that 1920s and the 1930s and Jim Crow is not reestablished?
I'm happy to take that. I believe, and people know I'm not shy about saying that I think we need to certainly vet folks. And I mean everybody. I have a piece I do called Who's Under the Sheets Now? I don't know that people have a hard time with the term white supremacy, but I mean it seriously. That is the foundation of America, is white supremacy, which means that people under the sheets wear white jackets, they're doctors. People under the sheets wear dresses and they're in front of classrooms. They have judges' robes. They're dentists, they're architects, you see. And as a result of that, this behavior, this is why it's so difficult to deal with the issue of racism in America, because you have people who are consciously racist and want to say it out loud, and then you have people who are in denial of their racism or do other things to somehow, seem to exonerate themselves from it. You have all these things going on where people are trying to distance themselves from this truth. And when I think about how we move forward and what we can do, everybody got a lane. I don't, ask people to do what I do. Do you? Do whatever you do. But there was one story that I thought was so powerful to me. I loved this story because it really speaks to what people can do and the difference between giving lip service to something or symbolism around the photo op where you have all the little diverse colored people. Beyond that, there was a situation, and you all remember this. As a matter of fact, I saw this on YouTube. When I saw it, I just wished I could have spoken to the sister who was talking. But you remember the woman who shimmied herself up that pole and took down that Confederate flag? You remember that? We watched her do it, right? Well, that wasn't just her. That was a group of people and a lot of planning that went into that. First of all, it's not easy to go up a pole like that. Let's first say that. So she talked about it, and you can see this on YouTube. She had to practice getting up the pole. They also knew that she was going to be arrested. So they had on hand an attorney with the expectation that she was going to get arrested. So they had planned this whole thing out, except for one thing. They could not anticipate. And that is what the armed guards or the police were going to do to get her off that pole. And so the police decided, there was a conversation that they were going to tase the pole. In other words, electrify the pole to get her down. Now, you see, they hadn't anticipated that. They anticipated all of this follow through, but they didn't anticipate that. And one of the people who were part of this, a white man, upon seeing and hearing what they were going to do, hugged that pole. He hugged the pole. And what he did when he hugged the pole, see, that's not cerebral. That's not intellectual. He put it all on the line. And he said to them, if you're going to shock her, you got to shock her through me. And see, that level of people willing to put themselves there. Now, of course, they didn't shock the white man. That would have really been bad press. But the bottom line here is he showed up. There was no plan in there. He immediately hugged that hole and that pole, and he knew what it meant. He knew what that meant. And I think all of us got to, hug the pole. Got to hug the pole. If you say you're about it, I don't care what lane it is, you hug the pole. Now you're with me. Now we're in this together. You're not an ally. Okay, People got to have titles for everything. How about just like, be my friend? There's one. So it's this whole idea of, in my mind, that the answer to that, the way we get at it, is all and. It's not either or. It's all and. Whatever you can put into it, whatever you can bring to it, like what Arta did.
Thank you, Dr. Joy. Dr. Arta, do you want to weigh in on that?
And no, I mean, I agree completely. And I think there's something we can all do, but I think it does require intention, right? There's going to be moments like Joy discussed where it is just gut, right? You just do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. But when you're not in those moments, it requires intention. It requires saying, I'm purposefully going to swim against the tide of where society is going to take me to try to do things differently. And I think, kind of three basic things, which I think are in order of increasing difficulty. The first is to educate ourselves. The second is to educate the people around us, right? Because that's not on our Black brothers and sisters to do. They've been doing that for long enough, right? They got their own things to do. It's our turn to start educating the folks around us, right? And so that's more difficult than educating ourselves, because you're invariably going to lose some friends when you do that. But that's all right. And then the third thing is action. And the action is even more difficult because it really requires us to step out of our comfort zone and to fundamentally change the way that we live our lives. And what that action is going to be different for everyone. But it means in your place of work, in the way that you live your life, being conscious of this issue and addressing it. Whether it's addressing a microaggression that someone's doing, you see someone, creating an unjust situation and speaking to it where you would have normally remained silent. One thing that I try to do is I try to be very conscious of where I spend my money. Now, rather than ordering things on Amazon, I do a quick Google search, which takes me 10 extra seconds. It's not that much extra time. And I look and I try to see, is there a comparable product that I can find from a Black-owned business? And I try to spend my money there. So I'm trying to undo some of the economic injustice that has occurred. It's not that hard for me to do it. I just have to think about doing it, right? I try to make sure that I spend more time in traditionally Black neighborhoods, eat at those restaurants, right? And for me, it's a rewarding experience because I get to meet people I wouldn't have otherwise met if I stay in my own neighborhood. And I get to experience. I love experiencing other cultures. That's why I travel. But there's other cultures right here in the United States that society has created a wall, right? And tried to keep me from experiencing those cultures. So I think that there's action that we can all take. But I think the most important part of it is that personal connection. And getting back to kind of the cerebral side of things, studies have been done, and I can educate myself over and over and over again about my biases, but that's not going to get rid of my biases. What gets rid of my biases is personal experience. So it is my connection with someone else. It is seeing that the stories that I learn through the media about how violent Black people are, the only way for me to counteract that is not up here, but it's through the friendships that I have and my personal experience seeing, that's actually not true. So I think that's where the grassroots effort from the Baha'i faith becomes so important, because it is aiming to connect our hearts. And I'm not trying to say that we're perfect. We're not. We're still learning, but at least we're trying to do the work and learn.
What Arta said is very true and very real. You got to do your own work. I'm not here to try. Listen, we have reams of the writings that our own Baha'i writings. Read them. If after that it suggests that we're going to sing a good round of "We Are the World" and "Kumbaya" and we'll be great, that's on you. We talk about principles of love. This came up for my daughter recently. It just came up for my daughter recently, where there was someone in her community that was basically, every time there was an issue of race, then the answer is, let's just pray real hard about it. Pray about it. Don't be negative. Let's not, dwell on all kind of stuff would happen. And she said to them, she says, "You believe that that I'm your sister, right? That we should have love among each other within this community, as even within our faith. You love each other." Yeah. She said, "So if I was in the street being beaten down by someone, an assailant, someone is beating me down, Would you just simply go out, join hands with other Baha'is and pray for me? Or would you get them off of me? Better yet, would you allow that for someone I know you love, your mother? Would you just say, let's pray about it for your mother? Or would you stop them? And so what happened to that person was they were made to feel.
Exactly.
They were made to feel. And I think that there are those teachable moments. But what I'm saying to you, the only person of color, you cannot harm yourself by trying to get other people to get it. That's what I don't want you to do, because see, we've done that. People have said, I'm not sure if I believe you're scarred. We pull the cover back. We even rip the scab off to say it. And they'll go, well, I think you might be exaggerating. I don't tell people that are vulnerable, that have been harmed, that have constantly showed up over and over again. Don't do that to yourself. That's not what you're asked to do. Love them for the sake of God and leave them to themselves.
I was just going to say, that is on people like me and Faith, right? So that's our work to do. So reach out to people like us, and we're happy to do that, because I think fundamentally this is it's a deeper issue, right? It's not just about racism at that point. It's about, as a Baha'i, it's about being obedient to the Baha'i faith. You can't really say you're a Baha'i and then try to ignore this issue. It's not there's no way that you can look at the Baha'i writings and think that is something that is acceptable. So I think that's really what it comes down to, is even if you're uncomfortable, even if you don't think it's your job to deal with it, et cetera, as as it sounds like is what's happening to this individual in their community, that the faith is unequivocal about this. It doesn't allow that, right? So exactly. And it's not your job to educate people about what they believe. They should be educating themselves about what they believe. But if there's issues, then that's where reaching out to other people who don't have to have to be traumatized in order to have that conversation, because I know for a lot of people they have to go through trauma to have that conversation. For me, it's not traumatizing to have that conversation. So let me do it. And in some ways, unfortunately, people will listen to me, right? Because if someone else says something, then they're the angry Black person, right? But when I say something, it's unfortunate that that's the situation, but that's part of the privilege that I have. But that's also me making sure that I use that privilege that I have to try to create justice.
And I wanted to say one other thing, Faith, and it's very interesting because my daughter deals a lot with, everybody is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's becoming, and it's a good thing, because hopefully it's embedded with change. But what also happens, and I want to say this, is very often what we consider is proper. Let's use some other words: professional, appropriate.
Right.
All of these words get housed in, but you need to say it the way I need you to say it.
Right.
In other words, you have to show up and center everything in whiteness and exactly. in white comfort. And so what sometimes gets translated as the appropriate or spiritual thing is just simply centering things in whiteness. And there's nothing in our faith that says you have to center things in whiteness. I get to show up my full Black self. I don't have to sit up and go, gosh, I wonder how Black I can be. No. I'm going to show up as I am. And what often happens is, well, this is the appropriate, this is the spiritual. No, come on. We have, this is the work we have to do, and we get to show up as our authentic selves to do it. Right. And so again, sometimes a difference in our energy or the manner in which we express ourselves gets couched in terms as though you're being, somehow not right, don't have boundaries or whatever people say about you, but you get to show up as you, and don't get confused and start looking at something as, and everything that's cultural is not okay either. Let's be clear. I get to bring joy and I get to bring my Blackness, but there's a lot of crazy stuff that I'm not going to be able to bring with me. And that's true of any group of people. But sometimes we have a tendency to center things into whiteness, which is not professional, spiritual, moral necessarily. It's just whiteness.
Thank you, Dr. Joy. and Dr. Arta. So the last question, this is the last and final question, and it's really draped in the idea of having some practical next steps. But I want to set the question up. It could be, it could be simple, but I want to set the question up a little differently. So I want to talk about, right, the idea that if I am a young, Black person in America, and I've experienced things as a youth, such as the mentor that you spoke about, Dr. Joy, or the young girl in the class, or even the students who are currently in the picture not getting their food. There's some healing that I need to do to optimize my humanity, right? I can be optimal in my career. I can be optimal in my health. Cool. But I need to optimize my humanity, and I need to heal past that. Likewise, on the other side of the coin, right? If I am a person who's grown up in America, like Dr. Arta talked about, and I have all of these different prejudices, ways that I've been able to see the world, I might be wealthy. I might be optimized in my economics. I might be optimized in some of my relationships, but I still haven't optimized my humanity. What are the practical steps for us to begin to heal internally? What are some suggestions for people to really look in the mirror, Michael Jackson, to shout out to him, and deal with what they see and start to unravel those grievances?
Yeah, I think it's there's a lot in that, right? Because it goes back to this idea of, as the Universal House of Justice said, a profound alteration of thought and action, right? And how do we do that when we are surrounded by a world that is pushing us in a direction that we don't want to go? And I think it's extremely difficult, right? This is why in the Baha'i writings, it tells us that this is our most vital and challenging issue, not because it's easy to deal with, but because it's difficult to deal with. And there's so much that's wrapped into it, right? Because there's health, there's economics, there's education, there's spirituality. It really affects everything. But I think ultimately, what is required of us is bravery, right? It's for me, for someone in my situation, and I think my situation is, what's required of each person is very different, right? My situation is very different than the situation of a person of color, and some people might say, well, I'm Middle Eastern, I'm a person of color. I'm not, right? When I get pulled over, I'm not in the least bit worried about getting shot, right? I've never been treated poorly by a police officer, right? Because when they look at me, they have no idea what I am. For the most part, they probably think I'm white. So when I walk into a there's a basic fundamental understanding that I've come to that I think is critical for someone in my situation, that when I walk down the road, the world that I walk in is a different world than if I'm walking next to a Black person. We're walking down the same street, but the world is different for them than it is for me. Things that don't put me at risk put them at risk, right? I had a Black friend who was coming to stay with me at my home, and I was going to leave for part of the time, and they decided they weren't going to stay there when I wasn't there, because I live in a wealthy white neighborhood and they didn't feel safe as a Black person staying at my home, right? Something that kind of blew my mind. I didn't even consider that. But I think, ultimately what's required of all of us is change, no matter where we are, no matter what the color of our skin is. And that change is difficult to come by, because as human beings, we like normalcy, right? We like normal, we like the known. The unknown is scary, but this is where the bravery comes in, right? Because if we are not brave enough to change ourselves, then we're certainly not going to be brave enough to change society. And I think part of that requires some hard reflection and being willing to stand up and say, it would be very easy for me to say, I grew up in Iran, this isn't my problem. But that's in really an ignorant stance, right? Because it is my problem, because I live here. I live in this house, going back to the quote from Cast, I live in this house. It is my problem. I benefit from the injustices that have occurred. So what am I going to do in the way that I live my life to try to reverse that? And so I don't think that there's any one answer. I think the answer is different for everyone, but I think it does require bravery. It does require, reflection. And ultimately, it requires trust in God to take those steps that we otherwise wouldn't want to take to fundamentally change what we're doing in our lives.
I think, thank you, Arta. This is so enjoyable. I'll tell you why it's so enjoyable. What's so enjoyable about this for me is I have the benefit of being surrounded by people that are tracking. I have, in this part of my life, the majority of people around me are tracking. Now, you understand, I've worked with everybody and will work with anybody, but it's so wonderful for me. A weight has been lifted off of me. Just simply hearing Arta say what I've been trying to say, and that people won't hear from me. I'm grateful for that. And I think, I have a different view in terms of young people, because I have a lot of hope in young people, because I was once you. And I was in trouble a lot. I was in trouble a lot as a youth. But I'm saying to you, get in trouble. I mean, and what I mean by that is that there is a courageousness of youth. There is a strength and there is a vision that is different. You do not hold my injuries. Young people they have their own paths, but they move through the world differently. And I encourage them to lean in. And I'm seeing that happen, by the way. I really am seeing that happen with young people of all races, all backgrounds, because see, they didn't grow up the way we grew up. They don't grow up, my own grandchildren Google check me and stuff. They're going, I don't know, right? So they are looking at this world and the knowledge that is in it. They're not listening to what folks are saying. They're fact checking everybody. And I think that's a good thing. And they're not willing. Again, any trajectory has to be moving us forward. And they are moving forward. And they are learning. They are showing up. And where their parents maybe didn't know or couldn't, they are stepping in. So I have a great deal. I'm passing the baton. I am passing the baton to them and very happily, because they're not going to drop it. And unfortunately, many people in my generation did. We didn't pass the baton properly. We dropped it. We bought an illusion of inclusion and we suffered because of it. So I think that, wherever you can get in and do your part. Those of you that are familiar with Kathleen Cross, who, the video about that Shakti Butler put out there, a trip to the grocery store, went viral. About probably 40 million people have seen that video now, where she basically stepped in when she saw an injustice and used, even though Kathleen's half Black and half white, used her white privilege, as Peggy McIntosh would say. If you have white privilege, spend it well. Let's not quibble about whether you got it. You do have it, but spend it well. And Kathleen spent it well when she was in that grocery store with me and her niece, my daughter. Spend it well. You got it. And again, I don't have the option not to deal with this issue. I simply don't. And like Stevie Wonder said, can't cash in your face. I live comfortably. I have I do great work in terms of fulfilling what is in my heart and what I believe spiritually is appropriate, all of those things. But I worry about my sons as I sit here. I worry about whether they startle a white woman in 2021 and how that could end up. Right. So that's the reality too. Dr. Joy is doing a lot of stuff, but Dr. Joy is living in Black skin. And so I navigate the world differently, and please appreciate that. The other thing I would say, again, in understanding that we don't all move, walk, talk, and do things the same way. Give you, everything I do is symbolic imagery and rhythm. I'm going to tell you a story, true story though. I actually have a picture of the person, but in this story, so here's what's happening. I work with organizations all over the United States. A lot of the organizations, undoubtedly, I'm in the presence of Black people. That is my goal and my focus, is to help people that look like me, unapologetically. I will help everybody, but that is my focus. So I'm working in organizations where we're trying to help folks, African-American people, move along and go to, whether it's education, sometimes I'm working with nonprofits, all different kind of people. But at the end of the day, they're always begging for money. the nonprofits, or going up there and going to foundations, going to somebody, please, can we get the money again to try to save the children? Whatever it is. And Dr. Joy gets brought in as the expert. So I want you to remember that I'm coming in as an expert. We're going to the city council to see if we're going to get the county and the city dollars. And then we bring in Dr. Joy to shore it up. I understand my role in the dog and pony show. Okay, so I want you to consider that. I'm putting that over there. And in this program, we're trying to help families. That's the whole goal, to help families. Now, over here, let's roll it back some years. There's a little girl. She's in second grade. I remember her distinctly. Her name is Wazira. I tell you her name because she gave me permission to do so as an adult person at this point. Wazira is in second grade. She comes to the front door of the class. Now, I have written an evidence-based model for education and was able to actually close the achievement gap and was able to engage Black parents that had 5% participation in the school to 95% participation in our program, because we developed what was culturally appropriate, a relationship-based approach. That's what it is, the relationship approach. So I had wrote that model back in the 90s, but this little girl comes in and I wrote a set of standards. Instead of don't run, jump, kick, spit, use your outside voice, I said you were noble. And so therefore my expectation is that you will behave in a noble way. And the very first thing we do is we greet each other every day with a smile and a handshake to strengthen the relationship between us. This is what our teachers did every day with every child to establish the what? The relationship. So this little girl comes into the class. She's kind of dirty, kind of smelly, unkempt, and the actual teacher, Ulf Spears, now Dr. Spears, she's the counselor. He's the person that's working in our program in this classroom with the second grade. And the little girl comes into the classroom, puts a coat over her head the entire day. Okay, so now you're little second grade comes to so I said to him, he called me up and he says, I don't know what we're dealing with here. Is she special ed? Because we didn't have special ed dollars. It's a poor nonprofit program trying to help in the schools. I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to just get her to smile and have that handshake. That's all I want you to do for right now. Now I'm going to do something different. I'm going to look at her relationships. So I called Antoinette Edwards, real person, true stuff. I said, Net's from the community. And I know that in our program, you know how when you're trying to get money, you have to prove, you have to give everybody has to have a degree. Some programs, you have to have a degree. Well, she had a degree. To this day, I don't know what it said. And I don't care what it said. She could have been a basket weaver. Didn't matter. Because what her skill was the community trusted her and loved her. Stay with me. Very important one. And there wasn't a house in our community that Antoinette couldn't get in because everybody loved Net. So I said, Net, I need you to get in this house. I need you to find out what's going on with this little girl, what's happening so that we can help her. Now, remember, this is Ulf Spears who asked me, I know she's not special ed because I observed her. But now Net comes back, says, yeah, mother's on drugs. There's nobody really minding the store. There's folks coming in and out all times of night. Who knows what's happened to this little girl? So I said, Net, can you reach out to the family? She reached out to the family. The family goes, oh, we're not dealing with her. Not dealing with her crazy mama. She burned every bridge. This I burned every bridge in the family. They said, we love Wazira though. We love that little girl. And we'll do anything for her, right? But I'm not dealing with her mama. Let's be clear. This is what's happening. So we know that these are poor families taking on another child or a couple because she had sisters. They're siblings. So I call, stay with me, because we're talking about what we can do, right? when people want to help, I want to give you help so you can understand what help looks like in a practical level other than, So I call, I said, Net. So I called Sylvia, who's at the welfare office on 82nd. And I tell her to get a stipend for this family for in-family foster care so they can have some funds to help her. I don't send them to social services and say, go to this, just go and get it. I send them to Sylvia. Why do I send them to Sylvia? Because I know Sylvia is going to treat them with respect and dignity. I know Sylvia is not under the sheets. I'm going to send you somewhere where I know they're going to love you as much as I do. But don't go there. If Sylvia's not there, turn around and leave because I cannot vet anyone else. Stay with me. So we get the stipend. We get the stipend for the family. The family's excited. They got Wazira. Wazira comes to the door. Now she's all cleaned up. She's got new clothes on. She can't wait to meet Mr. Spears at the door. And she smiles and a smile and a handshake. Then she goes to her desk and she puts coat over her head. Let's make it clear, okay? Let's make it plain. This wasn't a quick turnaround. Long story short, in this program, I want to talk about root cause analysis. This is a root cause. So I'm looking at this little girl and we're trying to shore her up. So we have something called wins. Stay with me. Wins. Everyone needs a win, right? Everyone needs a win. Can you imagine going through life without a win to celebrate? So I said, let's create them. You know, we had something called the Most Improved Student Award that would be given to them at our rally, which was the biggest one, was a summer rally. So the key, though, is everyone in the classroom has to vote on who the most improved student is, not the teacher. The students do, because they have what with each other? They have relationships. So I said, we're going to let them. This is second grade class, right? And every other class, we were in, like 6 schools. But so what happens is, it could be that Ronald kicked on people only 3 times this year instead of 12 times from last year. It's just the Most Improved Student Award. You with me? Okay. So towards the end of the year, not only did Wazira take the coat off, she was reading aloud at her level in her reading group. So Wazira wasn't special ed, which is where she would have been sent, by the way, had it not been for this intervention. So let's roll it down, get it all together. End of the day, there's a rally, right? At the rally, I have a picture of all of these things. At the rally, you have Wazira. Wazira is there with her mother, who to this day is running a halfway house for women. Because guess what else we did? We helped get her in treatment, right? She hooked up to the other folks in the community to give her the treatment she needed. So now they're both at the rally. You guys, she's getting ready to get an award. Never had anyone in this family gotten an award. Not, they didn't hear the, you're on the dean's list. They didn't get that, but they knew that Wazira was getting the Most Improved Student Award. So we made a big deal of it. Wolf is on this, and he's 7 foot tall, by the way. He literally is. He went back to school, went and played basketball, came back. He's leaning down. He's so big, he's leaning down, because what happens is the kid has to come down the aisle. They get a certificate showing but Most Improved Student, and there's a photographer who takes a picture, a win. And so Ulf Spears is standing there, but his wife, who has nothing to do with the program, hears about her and makes a life-size rag doll for her. So now he's got the certificate, the rag doll, and he announces that in my 2nd grade Humboldt Elementary School, the student who received the Most Improved Student Award is Wazira Johnson. And there is a standing ovation. 500 people stood up for this little girl. And you thought to myself, how did they know? How did they know? And Wazira was so scared she couldn't get out of her seat. She just couldn't. It was just too frightening. So Ulf Spears comes down with the rag doll and the little chart. The photographer is waiting to take the picture, and they go all the way to the back of the cafetorium, which it was. He hands her the rag doll, and he hands her this beautiful certificate. And I remember her face. I can see it now. I can see it now. She takes the certificate and she covers her head with her coat. But I want to roll this back to who she became. Of course, she went to school, went to culinary school, has her own family now, wants to write her narrative, her story. But let's go back to the program that I told you we have to win. We've got to get the money, right, to make the program go. And when I get there, whether I'm at the state or I'm at the, working with the, city council to beg for the money, I said to them one day, you didn't give me a place to celebrate her. You wanted me to show you that she went from, a D to a B. But she couldn't do that if she didn't lift her head. You didn't have that there for me to celebrate her lifting her head. It wasn't anywhere on the chart, but that was the biggest win of her life, to lift her head. And sometimes it's not so deep. I think about her almost every day, that she might have been put in some special ed class in the back of the room somewhere. Her family would have continued to suffer, but now they're all prospering because we loved them back. My community wrapped themselves around Wazira, and we loved her back. And I'm saying that that is what I've described as village. Everyone says it takes a village. What I've given you is an example of a village, poor village, but it's a village nonetheless. And if you want to be part of my village, you're welcome to be a part of my village. But it means that it's heart, it's not head. And they're not opposing, it's not dichotomies. But we don't want to go there, to that place. And it was love that saved her, and it wasn't there to be measured.
Joy, Arta, thank you for all of your brilliance and courage and example, and helping show us how to move forward. And I think one of the things that we heard over and over and over again today was it's about heart and it's about love. So with that, we thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Baha'i Chat.